Hello, and welcome back to the Performance Marketing Unlocked podcast, Season 4. We're hitting the ground running with the first episode of the season, touching on some big topics in the industry, namely search and social. For that discussion, we're joined by Pearce, the Managing Director at Greenpark Digital, for a deep dive into the current search ecosystem and how the likes of social media and AI, large language models, have taken a little bit of Google's search pie. Preceding that, however, is a chat with our very own premium content editor, Jyoti Rambhai, who's going to kick off the season with me, diving into some of our favourite predictions for the year ahead. So with that said, sit back, relax, and enjoy this episode of the Performance Marketing Unlocked podcast. Jyoti Rambhai, PMW's premium content editor. Welcome back to the studio for the first time in 2025. How are you?
I'm good, thanks. Happy New Year. Happy New Year, everyone.
Happy New Year indeed. And how's the new year begun for you? Both work-wise and personally, I suppose. Have you gotten over any festive season related hangovers?
I wouldn't quite call it a hangover. I picked up the cold that's been going around, thanks to my sister. So I'm only just recovering from that. So yeah, New Year's wasn't great. I was bunged up, just wanted to go to bed and not really in the mood for celebrating, I'm afraid.
Oh, not a great way to ring in the new year.
I know, but do you know what? I've spoken to so many people. Either people had it pre or post Christmas, so it's been going around.
Yeah, it's certainly flu season. I mean, I got back from abroad where it was nice and sunny back home in Australia and got a bit of a shock to the system when I got back, and certainly been dealing with some flu-like symptoms, but we power through because there's plenty to talk about as the year commences, namely predictions for the 12 months and beyond ahead. Now, if you've been reading PMW of late, you'll have seen a litany of New Year's resolutions and predictions series coming out across the website. We've reached out to hundreds of experts and we've heard from hundreds of experts. And as it stands right now, I've done the math. We've published 83 separate insights from people around the industry. And I believe by the time you listen to this, there'll be even more because there's still some predictions pieces that are yet to be on the website. I believe ones at the time of recording. But by the time you're listening to this, there'll be near on 100 separate insights for you listeners to go on and review on the website at your leisure. But to help you get a bit of an insight into what people have been talking about, some of the themes and hot takes that have been emerging, Jyoti, you've joined me to talk about the things that have stood out to you that you've read in our coverage.
Yeah, so I guess I want to kickstart the conversation with cookies, right? And I think we can all agree cookies are on the way out.
Third-party cookies. Certainly.
Just to specify. But we're at a point where we should not be relying on third-party cookies. And I think this year, I'm pretty sure we'll see its demise, even whether or not Google completely removes it or not, right?
Well, it looks like Google certainly aren't going to deprecate in the fashion that they were, but the user choice feature, I guess, is going to put the ball in the court of consumers.
So RTB House predicted that around 60 to 80% of Chrome users will turn off third-party cookies. That's a massive share of Chrome users. And that's, I guess, from a consumer perspective, it's all about privacy first. So I think that will naturally lead to a more of a focus on building first-party data and using this as the so-called audience model to target consumers.
And none of this should seem like a big revelation going into the year, really, because we've spent 24 months talking about cookie deprecation and signal loss associated with no more third-party data. But increasingly, particularly in the wake of Google announcing that it won't deprecate in the fashion it was going to on Chrome, we've now become aware of just how much the industry still relies on third-party data.
And I think especially like maybe like in the summer in Q3 last year, there was an element of complacency about, oh, okay, it's not going away, we're okay to carry on how we're working. But, you know, like your pool of people that you can target if you're using third-party cookies is just going to get smaller and smaller. And then I think the other thing that's driving this is new data protection regulation that's hopefully going to come in, and that will also push consumers to more of a privacy-first view on these things.
It's interesting that you say the regulation will sort of push consumers in that direction, because quote from Carell Cooper, the CMO of Gum Gum, he said on cookies,
Yeah.
regulators are suing, browsers are blocking cookies, but most importantly, people are fed up. And he goes on into his quote, and it says, tracking-based advertising ends not through forced regulation, but with consumers simply walking away from or blocking brands that won't respect their privacy. And I think that's the sentiment certainly behind Google's cookie U-turn, is maybe the education on cookies, because a lot of consumers don't really know what they are.
Yeah.
But they sort of are beginning to become aware that they should try and avoid third-party tracking, because it's not really beneficial to them on an advertising front. So if consumers get up and walk away, well, the signal loss is going to be mega, isn't it?
Yeah, and those that haven't started preparing for that are going to feel it.
Certainly. It leads me to another quote that I love from Tiffen Dano Kwan, the CMO of Amplitude. Tiffen, I apologize if I pronounce your name wrong. I've only ever seen that written out in front of me. But Tiffen has said, as it stands, nobody is really getting personalization right, which is quite a harsh critique of the industry, if I'm completely honest. But it might speak to why, as Carell said, consumers are a little bit fed up, because the trade-off that consumers have expressed a willingness to make is, in exchange for their privacy and their data, they want good personalized advertising. But that relies, to get personalization right in any capacity, relies on good first-party data. And if, you know, as Tiffen has pointed out, if you're failing on that front and you're not getting your personalization right, it's a great way to lose consumers. They're certainly not going to be willing to share anything with you.
Yeah, because they've lost their trust. And that's going to be a big thing. Brand trust going forward and brand loyalty. Because I think consumers that trust a brand will be loyal and they'll go back to that.
If we move on there, the brand suitability, brand trust one's really fascinating. So is there anything on that topic that's stuck out to you? And that's one that's heated up already just at the start of the year with the announcement of Meta removing fact checkers from its platforms.
And that's sort of similar to what X did last year. And it's going to rely on users to flag misinformation. Now, when X made that announcement, a lot of brands automatically started boycotting the site, right? And if Facebook is doing that, now just to be clear, this is only happening in the US at the moment, how many brands are going to boycott that? And from a performance marketer's perspective, you know, social is one of the biggest channels. So does that mean we'll see a shift in ad spend?
Imagine staring down the barrel in a few months' time, certainly in the US, of a social landscape where TikTok is banned and sort of fact-checking regulation is at it's very much minimized to the point where it's almost non-existent across the remaining platforms, being Meta and X. Obviously, you know, Pinterest and Reddit still have their regulations, but imagine no TikTok, and Instagram, Facebook, and X are relying on community notes for their fact checking. It'll be an interesting space for advertisers to try and navigate.
So this is sort of referring to the media spend index that we did at the back end of last year. Through our survey that we carried out, social is one of the biggest channels still for performance marketers. So it's going to create a big dent in in their ad spend or where that spend is going to be shifted.
There's also something to speak to why social has become so popular, and we'll touch on this in detail with the interview with Chris coming up, because he's the resident search expert. But it is how social has sort of entered the search landscape now as well, and has become a very big element for, at the very least, discovery across things like TikTok and Meta's platforms too. So there's something to be said for, I see why the investment in social is so grand, because it's very multi-dimensional and omni-channel, but the landscape is incredibly fragmented, and from a regulatory perspective, very, very difficult to keep up with. So that's certainly one to watch.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, because it's almost in a juxtaposition, because you've got all this stuff around brand safety, and then this idea of search, it becoming a search tool, TikTok especially. But that also sort of begs a question about Google as a search player. Is its dominance going to demise slightly? And then you've got other players like Reddit coming into that as well. So that's an interesting area, I would say.
That will be one that we watch very keenly to open up the year throughout Q1 and Q2.
On your point about fragmentation, I just think the media industry has become increasingly fragmented.
Yes, this is where I was going.
Okay. Over the last couple of years, especially in the programmatic space, and I'm talking across multiple pillars here, CTV, podcasts, retail media networks. So I think it's a space to watch to see what happens, because there are so many players here.
Now, what about the AI of it all? Because I know this is another topic worth talking about. So did you have any takes that you thought hit the nail on the head with AI? Any of the ones that you thought were a bit more controversial, perhaps, or something that you're not so sold on from our experts and thought leaders?
So I think the general theme from everyone that we've spoken and sort of written up is that 2025 is the year of AI adoption. And I think that's going to be fairly true to a certain degree. Like last year was all about looking at the solutions, almost like the AI vision.
And an education piece as well.
Yeah. So this year there will be a focus on adopting it. But I think in order for marketers to fully integrate it, they also need to address some of the anxieties and the misconceptions around it directly, because I still think there's a fair bit of that, and especially concerns around job security, skills, and what job roles will look like.
Well, we've already seen Klarna so very much embracing automation to the point where it has impacted hiring and firing. So it might be one we continue to see. And I know Sam Altman of OpenAI recently wrote on his Substack about not bots, but essentially AI actors coming in and not taking jobs, but having jobs created to be operated by AI. It's a really hard thing to get my head around.
Yeah.
But it's this idea of you're adding more jobs within your business, but you're not hiring people to do those jobs. You're hiring AI in whatever shape or form it comes. So it's mind-boggling.
Yeah, it's an interesting concept in itself. And to put it in a literal sense, are we hiring robots? Right, that's the question there, right?
Is that where we're at now?
Yeah.
We're going to have to wait and see. Who knows?
But I guess the other thing for me around AI is this, how it's sort of bridging the gap between creative and performance. Now, I think last year I touched upon this in one of my columns, but I think this year we're going to see a little bit more of a joined up approach, because, we have to, right?
This is the idea of, I guess, performance moving up the funnel and bringing creative and data, bringing those two teams together and removing some of those silos.
And, we've got all, when you're optimizing for different channels, right, you have to optimize a creative. So you have to work together. And then you've got the other side of it is, a lot of channels are offering more automated options to optimize campaigns, right? So that in a way, advertisers are losing a little bit of control. But what they do have control of is the creative and the messaging. So I think there will be more of a focus on how they are optimizing those for each of the channels they're using.
Now, before I let you go, Jyoti, I wanted to round out with one thing that I want to touch on. And it was a topic that in many respects wasn't as at the forefront of the industry as I thought it might be, and that's sustainability. And I think it's important to have sensible conversations around sustainability and the best practice for producing it. And I guess lately what we've seen is there's a very good business case to be made for sustainability in advertising, because often it's the case of optimizing, as we say, means cutting a lot of the crap, and that's just cutting down spend that goes towards things that aren't generating any return. Wasted ad spend, reducing that reduces data usage, can reduce emissions. Anyway, Richard Davis, the CEO and co-founder of 51 to Carbon Zero, told us big tech companies have in fact increased their emissions by 30 to 50% in the last few years, which is a whopping claim to have made. Now, he hasn't sourced where that's from, so that's just coming directly from us, from Richard via us through to you. But I did some research, and there's an interesting discussion around AI, in particular large language models, and sustainability, because according to energy tracking platform Loop, the complexity of AI systems demands substantial energy to a point where a single query on ChatGPT releases 4.5 grams of carbon, which is the equivalent to the carbon footprint of 21 Google searches. So I think it'll be really fascinating to see whether these big tech platforms and a lot of these AI leaders begin to question the environmental impact of all of this AI innovation.
And this sort of goes back to my point earlier, where I am a little bit of a skeptic when it comes to AI. And I think it's not just about anxieties and misconceptions. When it comes to sustainability, it's a real challenge to try and balance it all.
Mm-hmm.
And I think maybe that's going to be the thing to watch this year. I think that's going to be probably one of the biggest challenges, to see how these big tech companies manage that or navigate that.
Well, that's what I was going to do to round out our quick discussion before we move on to my conversation with Chris from Greenpark. Jyoti, we've spoken a lot about our experts' predictions. I feel it would be unfair if you and I didn't put ourselves up there and take a little bit of a leap of faith and put some thoughts of our own into the ether at the beginning of the year. So have you got a prediction yourself of something you expect to see in the next 12 months that might be a little bit of a hot take before we finish up?
I think given that the media industry is so fragmented, I think maybe not at the start of the year, but maybe at the back end of the year, I think we'll start to see some sort of consolidation happening, whether that's in CTV with the retail media networks. I think that's probably where we're heading.
My prediction to finish off the episode, well, this portion of the episode, I think audio is going to make waves outside of just the US this year. It's one that when we spoke to Spotify last year, there's clearly huge scope and potential for it, but for whatever reason, as we saw in the media spend index, Europeans are just not willing to spend on the medium all that much at this stage, despite its potential to return and to generate returns. And the US has served as a great example of that in many ways. So my prediction is the UK and broader European ad industry is going to wake up to the potential of audio advertising. And that'll surprise some of you within editorial, because I've been a bit of a skeptic of audio myself, but I've sort of been won over in what I've seen on the research in the past couple of months. So audio is a viable performance channel. Keep an eye out. I think this is the year it breaks Europe.
Okay, I guess we'll come back at the end of the year and review our predictions.
Yeah, we'll have to. We'll have to keep ourselves honest.
Yeah.
Jyoti, always a pleasure having you in studio. Thanks very much for joining me.
Thanks, Joe.
This episode of the Performance Marketing Unlocked podcast is sponsored by Meta. Did you know that Meta's AI-powered solutions can help your brand increase its advertising effectiveness. Channel 4 has enjoyed remarkable results by leveraging Meta's Conversions API and Advantage Plus catalog ads. As the first broadcaster to adopt these tools, Channel 4 has reduced its cost per incremental view by 10x and increased incremental streams by 52%. Want to learn more about how Meta can help your business thrive? Head to Meta to discover the power of AI-powered marketing, or head to performancemarketingworld.com to read about Channel 4's story if you need a little bit more convincing. Chris Pearce, hello and welcome to the Performance Marketing Unlocked studio. How you doing?
I'm very well, thank you. Delighted to be here.
Happy New Year.
Yes, indeed.
Are you excited to be kicking off season 4 of the show?
I so am, yeah. I think it's a great time to get started.
A great time to get started. We're back in the warm embrace of Britain, or at least I am, after some time abroad back home in Australia. Were you fortunate enough to go anywhere fun over the break, or was it just at home for you?
No, it was fun, but it was at home. So I wasn't lucky enough to escape, but it was just great to be home with the family.
How is it being back into the throes of work?
It's been manic in a good way. It's not a quiet period at all.
It's interesting here, actually, since moving to the UK from Australia. Obviously, Christmas coincides with our summer break.
Yeah, of course.
So everyone kind of taps out and goes on holiday. So January and February are still quite, it's a bit like our August and July when things are a little bit slower.
Yeah.
But certainly here I've come back and it's January, it's Q1, it's go.
Yeah.
Now, we're here today to talk about search and the changing search ecosystem and some of the factors that have brought about that change.
Yeah.
I think the best place to start for our audience might be for you to tell us, you're the managing director of Greenpark Digital. Tell us why that makes you an authority on all things search.
Sure. Well, Greenpark was founded about 11 years ago now on the premise of brand publishing, but brand publishing derived from search insights. So we've been doing search and understanding search behavior, well, since the beginning. It's the absolute essence of what Greenpark does. So it's search and social, and obviously the content that goes with that. And it's very much about performance. So everything we do is optimized for performance. It has to get results. It has to convert. But it all starts with understanding human behavior and specifically search behavior.
So Greenparks, they've been around a while, but so have you yourself.
I have.
A bit of an industry veteran, so to say.
Yeah.
The landscape has changed a huge amount in just the past sort of 12 to 18 months.
Absolutely.
But when we look through your career and your experience, take us through the history of search and how it sort of evolved into what it is today.
Absolutely. Well, I think we were talking earlier. I suppose one advantage I have is I've lived through a lot of these changes. And I was thinking earlier, if you actually go back to, it was 1990, the first ever search engine was invented by a student, actually, at McGill University in Montreal. And actually, it's quite interesting. A lot of these kind of search technologies evolved out of the sort of education sector. And this was about indexing FTP files for academics, basically. And this guy, he named it Georgie, I think it was. It's quite a sweet name for a search engine. But it was the first time you could actually index digital files and help a user find the right file. So that really is where it all started. A couple of years later, there was a fascinating search engine called the World Wide Web Wanderer. And that was the first time that a web crawler was used, which was quite a breakthrough. I think that was around 92, 93. Then you got some of the more familiar names like Alta Vista, Yahoo. They were one of the first to start using graphical interfaces. So with Yahoo, I don't know if you remember Yahoo at all, but it was the first time you could actually get some sort of relatively comfortable user interface that was a bit easier to navigate. And then, of course, 98, Google comes along and invented the PageRank. So the idea of looking at authority of a site and how many other sites are pointing towards it. So the whole notion of sort of backlinks and building authority based on what other sites thought of your site and your content. And then, of course, significant evolutions of Google, absolute dominance in terms of search. Obviously, they are still dominant, but as you alluded to, I'd say in the last couple of years, particularly the last 12 months, there's been an enormous sort of fragmentation in search. We refer to it as omnichannel search. So other search engines, of course, but phenomenally, it's been the explosion of social search. And then the last year or so of LLM search. So those sort of fundamentally, that's a sort of potted history of search, if you like.
Yeah, we've got a real search nerd in the house.
Well,
I'd love to see
I
it.
sort of do my best.
It's fascinating in that, I guess that's sort of 35-year timeline now.
Yeah.
But 98, Google hits the world and it's still around, very much the dominant player today.
Yeah.
The page rank as well, still a big element of Google search as well and SEO. But as you mentioned there, things have changed and they're changing pretty rapidly, it would seem. Particularly, as you said, with social media, I think TikTok, Instagram, there's some of the really big players in that sense, perhaps Pinterest and Reddit as well, these discovery tools that they're referred to.
Yeah.
What do you think's driven that upheaval? Is it more consumer behavior and changes in consumer behavior, or is it these social platforms, they've sort of had a targeted campaign to get in on search?
I think it's probably more the latter. I think the social platforms obviously started, from various points, but a lot of it was about obviously connection, engagement, community. As those social platforms evolved to be more about commerce, should we say, I think then it was pretty clear that if your platform was being used to discover new products, new services, it was a natural evolution to turn that into a commerce opportunity. But then you've got the problem of how do consumers find your products, your services, your brands, and hence looking at search technologies and embedding some of these sort of search methodologies from the big search engines into the social platforms. And I think it's been that way round, which in turn has helped drive consumer behavior. If you've got the audience, particularly younger audiences, already there on the platform, and you're innovating in terms of video formats, interactivity, to then have that seamless journey from content to commerce and to be found accurately, that's the big shift in behavior, I think. And that's why Google is losing some of this audience and some of this traffic. Not exclusively. I think that's the thing, that the user journey, again, has got more and more fragmented. It's not to say Google isn't still dominant. Of course it is. But depending on the category, depending on what you're looking for, I think you're using some of these social platforms to find content and ultimately buy brands and services. And Google may be part of that journey, or it may not appear in that journey at all. And that's increasingly what we're finding.
It's a bit chicken and the egg, isn't it? Was it, who led who, where, and when?
Yeah.
It's interesting you say it seems to have been a natural evolution for those social platforms, but certainly some do it better than others. And I would say TikTok Shop is, I guess, one of the leading examples of a social platform that's become in many ways a search and discovery tool now, bringing in that commerce offering. But I wanted to look at, from Google's perspective, we've spoken to Google previously on the show. We had their UKMD, Diana Najdi, and she said something that I'd like to get your take on. And I'll offer my thoughts afterwards. But she said, discovery is happening everywhere now. I think TikTok, social media, even ChatGPT and these AI models we'll get into. But decisions are made on Google. And I think what she's inferring there is these social platforms are great tools for inspiration. You might find a recipe on TikTok, or you might find inspiration for a holiday on Instagram Reels. But when it comes to making that purchase or, buying a recipe book or booking that trip, you go to Google to get to the website to make those bookings.
Interesting.
It's interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it actually depends on the category and probably the sort of persona of who's doing the searching and what they are familiar with. So a bit like I said earlier, that Google may well appear as part of that journey. And for some people, I think Google is still the default for the big decision making. But I think increasingly that is changing, and the younger people, for example, are more comfortable booking directly from somewhere like TikTok if it's a smaller purchase, or even going then direct from maybe some inspiration they've discovered on Google, but then they may go direct to a site if it is booking a holiday or whatever, and bypassing Google altogether. I mean, I think that's the watch out, and that's not obviously universal, and it's very difficult to start generalizing about user journeys without really having the real insight and the data.
Speaks to the fragmentation.
Exactly.
I suppose.
Exactly.
Yeah. Now, it's fascinating that we talk about this though, and as if, people are trying to get in on Google's pie, and in some respects are succeeding in knocking off that search crown, certainly making it a more fragmented market, and you've got, as a user, choice.
Yeah.
US antitrust trial last year found a search monopoly for Google, and there might be some implications imposed on that. And then here in the UK and Europe, the CMA are doing their own research as well into the platform. What do you think some of the outcomes might be from those findings? With the search respect, there's the ad tech monopoly finding too.
Yes.
But, do you think Google will be restricted in mounting a defence, I suppose, to some of this?
They absolutely will be mounting a defence. I mean, there's talk of them having to sell off Chrome, for example, isn't there, as one of the potential outcomes. I think with the change of administration in the US, with the potential ban on TikTok, I mean, we'll come back to that, but the Supreme Court are looking at TikTok's defense, which
the new administration, the incoming administration, has sort of tried to put a pause on as well, which is really interesting.
Which, again, given in the first administration of Trump, he was very much against ByteDance. Now he's got an alleged soft spot.
It's fascinating. A lot can change.
Absolutely fascinating. You've then got, I mean, obviously Google is a American iconic institution. It has monopolistic tendencies for sure. I suspect there'll be some sort of compromise done. And I mean, Google's got some fantastic deep pockets and some very good lawyers. And I'm sure they'll be doing everything they can to influence that outcome, to minimize the impact on their profitability and their reach and scale. But it may end up with having to sell off something like a Chrome. Who knows? But they will be absolutely defending that tooth and nail. I'm absolutely sure.
We can look into the weeds of all this and postulate endlessly, and it's a lot of fun to do so. But back to what you do with Greenpark, and I suppose what you're trying to offer your clients is brands, advertisers, and marketers looking at this landscape and the way the ecosystem's changing. It's not just old school page rank, and SEO has completely changed. It's now algorithms and platform and channel specific algorithms. How can a brand marketer and advertiser succeed in this new search and social ecosystem? What's the advice for them?
Just before I get into that, it's interesting you talk about algorithms. I mean, Greenpark's entire proposition is creating amazing content that people and algorithms love. So we're absolutely obsessed with creating the right kind of persuasive content that is recognized and loved by algorithms. So that's the first fundamental point. I think the second point is we put a lot of emphasis on insight and understanding the consumer behavior before we recommend anything. So we do something called an omnichannel category assessment, which is designed to give us exactly that data as to where are people searching, what are they searching for, what is their intent, and where do they go next. So a recommendation to any brand is to do that insight piece first. It's very, very tempting to say, oh, we're going to open a TikTok shop, or we're going to dive into Instagram Reels because we think it's going to be great. That's fine, but it's got to come from a position of understanding what is going on.
So there's an emphasis on a need to collect first-party data.
Absolutely. Well, that too as well. I think the second thing is then understanding content formats, what is performing well in that particular platform, mirroring or matching it with search insight data. I mean, TikTok's a great example. We've got a Unilever brand, Vaseline, that we do a lot of work on TikTok in the APAC region. And one of the breakthroughs was it was using 3 different types of insights. So it was TikTok search keyword data. It was TikTok-specific platform insights in terms of what was trending. And then it was general social media trends, themes, what was appealing to that particular audience. And it was a blend of those 3 bits of insight that led to a content strategy, a creative brief, to then be able to deliver super targeted, short-form, shoppable videos that were driving, exponential growth in terms of, referral traffic, driving to TikTok shop sales. So you've got to have a blend of that information, insight, understanding. You've then got to turn that into a really, really compelling content brief. And then you still need that spark of creativity and inspiration. But you've got to get the format right. You've got to be thinking about the platform from the off. I hope this doesn't still happen, but in ad agencies I've been in, you often hear the phrase, cut downs for social. And you're like cringing inside. No, it's not about cutting down for social. It's about creating first for social and gracefully building up rather than degrading from, say, a TV platform.
Is it difficult internally, I suppose, when you've got the algorithms that change at such a rapid rate? And it's always, people talk about trying to get up the page rankings with Google, and it's not always clear what you need to optimize for. It's equally opaque when you're looking at a Meta-owned platform versus a ByteDance-owned platform. And even if you're looking at other things like X per se, those that are still brave enough to invest over there. How do you manage all that, making sure that you're keeping up so that you do deliver for those clients?
Well, I think with the bigger platform, like you say, Google, we are working with Google for many, many clients, and we're constantly iterating, testing and learning. Obviously we follow the updates. Daily we're optimizing content. We're testing to see if this tweak makes a difference to engagements, to rankings. Obviously with things like experience coming in, in terms of the EEAT sort of rankings, it's keeping on top of those kind of evolutions all the time. It's such a vast topic area, and there are so many variables that you need to think about. It's almost quite difficult to capture them when you. I suppose you've got to go back to the basic sort of 3 layers that we always revert to, the kind of the technical basis. So is your site performing well enough for Google to read it accurately, quickly, loading fast, all those kind of things, the core web vitals. Then obviously we look at the on-site performance, and then of course off-page or digi-PR, as we now call it. But it still comes back to, my roots are, is this content going to be the most relevant for the user at the point of need? Because if your content isn't meeting the need of that search query, then, everything else is kind of not irrelevant, but you are going to always struggle to rank really,
and
really highly.
Specified to that channel, that
platform. Exactly. Yeah.
And oftentimes you hear, the idea of cross-posting the same thing on different social platforms. Perhaps it's not paying the social platforms enough to respect as to what might trend a little more on a TikTok versus an Instagram.
Exactly.
And oftentimes there might be overlap, but then often there isn't.
Yeah.
There's an element we haven't touched on here, and that's AI.
Yeah.
And I imagine internally, when it comes to managing the scope and breadth of keeping up with algorithms, there's a use case certainly there for Greenpark. But large language models like ChatGPT are now in and of themselves sort of wheedling their way into that search landscape.
Oh, totally.
What's the influence of them there? Is that where the future's headed?
I think almost certainly. As you know, ChatGPT launched its own dedicated search engine. Obviously, other models like Perplexity. I was looking at a study the other day. In certain categories, they're getting up to the 1% of share of search, which is phenomenal. 1% sounds small,
doing really well.
Perplexity is racing up the ranks, as it were. I think, again, I see all these blog posts about your surefire model to win in LLMs. And then you look at the content, and actually some of the fundamentals of SEO are still absolutely there. You've got to have the relevance, you've got to have the technical expertise, you've got to use things like FAQs, short form content, using natural language. All of those things are still true. I think there is, if you take GPT specifically, we know that it has to use live retrieval. If you're looking for an absolutely bang up to date piece of information, the model is only good as the data it's been trained on. So obviously they need to go to what's called live retrieval to find absolutely up-to-date information. And obviously the most open API is Bing. So there's been a lot of talk about if you're optimizing and you're appearing number one in Bing, you're more likely to be number one in ChatGPT search results.
That's interesting.
That is not universally true.
I see.
And we only know that through constant testing. So in some instances, that is true, but not all. But this plays back to the fact that those algorithms are tricksy and they're constantly evolving. And you can't just go, right, we're number one in Bing, job done. We're going to appear number one in ChatGPT because you're not guaranteed to do that. But there is an element of that coming in.
I see.
So that's a little nugget that is a lot of our clients would not be aware of that. I mean, you mentioned Bing and, furrows
Usually
brow.
people are tapping out at that.
Yeah,
but
exactly. But I think it will be increasingly important because it is feeding the LLMs because of its open API.
So I suppose before we close out and move on to the Resell Me a Pen challenge,
yes.
the future, perhaps that's a good way to look, is 12 to 18 months from now, is there going to be as rapid a change as we've seen, or have things sort of steadied and we know what direction it's heading, and then even beyond, dare you guess what things might look like, having sort of been in the industry a little while now. What are you planning for? What are you preparing for?
Omnichannel, for sure. In terms of omnichannel search and social.
And we're almost already there.
I think we absolutely are already there, but it's taking a while for people to recognize it and for clients to really think holistically in terms of where am I going to place my content? Where are people looking? And how do I ensure my content is the most relevant at the point of need? It's that sort of contextual search and semantic search that's really, really important. Let's not forget, however, that AI overviews with Google is going to get better and better. And referring to our earlier conversation, Google's not going to stand still, for sure. They will continue to evolve. They will continue to push and fight for their revenue model. So I don't think Google's going away. I think they will continue to innovate and will be a fantastic place for brands for a long, long time. I think the other piece coming into the future is this sort of polarization of free speech, brand safety. Obviously, I think we alluded to it. You've got the online safety bill in the UK. You've got similar legislation in Europe. Now we're looking at throw away all your moderators and fact checkers.
The big meta news of this week.
Exactly.
As well.
The meta news this week. It's obviously horrified lots of people. It's polarized opinion. That is going to be interesting, to say the least. And then you come back to, if TikTok were to be banned, that I think will drive a lot of traffic onto things like maybe YouTube, maybe back to Google, maybe Instagram. So some of those other platforms may hugely benefit from that. But that's a big, big decision. Having said that, I know a lot of government agencies and consultancies, even in this country, our employees are not allowed TikTok on their phones because there is this perceived security risk.
It's the same in Australia.
Of course. Yeah. So it's not as if it's not without precedent. So it may well get banned, or there's a millionaire lining up to buy the US version, but it doesn't include the algorithm. So, because that's proprietary. So you're going to buy a social media platform without its algorithm, which I'm not quite sure how that's going to pan out for him.
Yeah, we'll have to wait and see. But what I'm hearing is the fragmentation we see doesn't appear to be going anywhere really. And it's embracing omni-channel, but there's still going to be all of this choice and all of this decision making. And, the AI models aren't going anywhere. Google's not going anywhere. Social media, barring perhaps TikTok in some places, isn't really going anywhere. So it's still going to be a bit of a weedy jungle to wade your way through.
I think the other thing, we were talking to a client literally yesterday about TikTok Shop. Where I think it has challenges for big multinational brands is the profitability of TikTok Shop. It seems to work really well for smaller brands, niche brands. It works well for big brands with line extensions, new releases.
Amazon's
and then
TikTok Shop.
Exactly. But if you're a mainstream mass market brand, I think there are still challenges for brands to make platforms like TikTok Shop really profitable. Just in terms of the investment you need, the scale, the volume you're driving, and the commissions that they're taking, which are changing all the time. As the more successful they get, the more margin they want from brands and advertisers. So all of that will play out as well in terms of brands need to be able to make money from e-commerce sites, clearly. But if it's not working for the big brands, will that put a halt on growth? I think that's another interesting one to play out.
Who knows?
Who knows?
Hey, Chris.
Exactly.
There's also a sustainability piece to this all as well, where I've read recently that a search into ChatGPT is far less sustainable than a query on TikTok search bar or Google even. And perhaps it's because it's got to do that live retrieval. I imagine that uses a lot of data. We are running out of time, though, so we do have to move on. It's time for PMW's famous Resell Me a Pen challenge. To refresh the audience and Chris on how it works, you've got 60 seconds to resell me an outdated product or service of your choice.
Okay.
Now, I used to only warn the guest when there was 10 seconds of their pitch remaining.
Right.
Now, I kept that throughout all of season 3 to keep it fair, but that was very controversial because time does sneak up on you.
Bet.
So what I'm going to do is I'll give you a warning when there's 30 seconds remaining.
Okay.
And when there's 10 seconds remaining. That's the new change for this season of the show. But do you want to reveal to myself and the listeners, Chris, what it is you're going to try and resell?
Well, I've done some rapid thinking. I don't think this has been on your list, but I am going to try and sell you a gold-plated money clip.
Definitely hasn't been on the list.
Fantastic.
I look forward to this pitch, Chris. All right, take it away in 3, 2, 1.
Right, I would like to sell you a gold-plated money clip because I think they are a beautiful artifact. My granddad used to have one, which used to fascinate me as a child. So if you're not familiar, it's almost like a really thick, chunky paper clip, I guess, that you would fold your old paper money, for those that don't remember paper money, insert it into the clip, it would fit it into your pocket. It's less bulky than a wallet. It's actually a beautiful piece of almost like male jewellery. It will amaze your friends when you reach into your pocket and pull out this beautiful gold paper clip. It will generate conversation. It will make you absolutely stand out. And you may be thinking, well, no one has cash anymore, so what's the point? I would say, au contraire. I was in a barbershop at Christmas and the card machine was broken. And he wanted me to transfer money directly into his bank account unless I had cash. And as luck would have it, I had 2 tenors in my gold paper clip. I could retrieve them from my pocket and hand it over to the barber and walk out of that barbershop having paid for my haircut.
Chris, I love the pitch, and I'll get into why first.
Right.
First thing we have to say, we've gone 14 seconds over time there.
No!
So not quite under the 60 seconds, but I think it's a good way to kick off the season because it's a good pitch on a good product, and I'll tell you why.
Right.
This appeals to a lot of people. You talk about your granddad, the gold-plated money clip. Yeah. Perhaps those older listeners, a little bit of nostalgia, they can think back to the day of where they can just whip out a wad of cash. It's a little bit showy at times as well. Flick through it. Yeah. But I think the real appeal here is for the Gen Z audience that are listening, because being a part of Gen Z myself, and I've got many friends that adore anything that's considered vintage. Yeah. And it doesn't always have to make sort of logistical, rational sense. No. There's a lot of things that are coming back that perhaps have no right to. I'm thinking vinyls and records players are very popular among my friends at the moment. And so the idea of, you can have all of your money and pay and everything on your watch, in your phone, but anything you might have, whether it be paper money, cards, gold-plated money clip is the kind of vintage item that I can see being very appealing to the Gen Z folk like myself. And for that, I commend you on that pitch, Chris. Thank you very much.
Pleasure. It's a bit like Room 101. Yeah. It's not going in, though.
Chris, we'll end the show there. Thank you very much for joining us on the first episode of Season 4 of the Performance Marketing Unlocked podcast. It's been a real pleasure.
Likewise. Thank you very much indeed.
And that concludes this episode of the Performance Marketing Unlocked podcast. A big thank you to my guests this week, premium content editor Jyoti Rambhai. Of course, a big thank you to Chris Pearce, the managing director of Greenpark Digital, for joining me to discuss all things search. Thanks to you, the loyal listener. I haven't forgotten about you over the break for tuning in each and every fortnight as you do. We will be back in 2 weeks' time with another episode of the Performance Marketing Unlocked podcast. Please, if you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe to the show on your podcast platform of choice. And you can also watch full episodes of the show on our YouTube. So make sure you go over and subscribe to our YouTube channel. And if you're after more digestible, slightly shorter clips from the show, you can find those across our socials on LinkedIn, TikTok, and on Blue Sky. In the meantime, have an amazing week, and you'll be hearing from me again shortly. Bye for now.